Today, we're going to break down and demystify the inner workings of DTF printing.
Let's do it. Hi, everyone. I'm Rob from OmniPrint, the product lead for the OmniDTF. Help develop it, regards to the hardware, software, all the way down to like ink formulation, film selection. That's all done in-house. We do just really end-to-end development of the printer.
So from beginning to end, you have had a major to minor hand in every step of the creation?
Yep.
Is there anything that you haven't touched?
So not so much on the physical appearance of the shell, the printer, but
leave the graphics selection to somebody else who pressed graphics.
Yeah, actually the graphics selection, there were some parts I had to cake, but really it was the physical appearance of the shell, the front, the front end of what you're looking at in the printer. I had some minor say in that, but it was really functionality. Yeah, functionality is where I was.
Okay, so if I have a question about anything that's going on inside of that printer, DTF printers in general, because they share components across brand to brand. You've been hands-on digging deep in the whole thing.
Yep. Been there.
Color profiling, inks, and
Yep. Ink formulation, ink testing, film selection, which really is people don't realize how important film selection is.
Oh yeah.
In DTF printing.
I'm learning.
Yeah. So we have tested, I would say, over 150 plus different film vendors to get something that's optimized for our ink set as well as our color, just the overall package. So it's quite a bit of development, and we're always striving to do better and make the product better. So you're just going to see more and more changes to improve it.
Cool.
So the industry standard.
So for those of you who know a bit about me, when I get a chance to talk with Rob, I get a chance to geek out and dig deep, and we end up spending half of the time that we're trying to figure something out on the DTF to make improvements or create another level of quality. We'll spend half that time just geeking out about all the other stuff in the industry, things that can be done, nerding out on the details. So, like a brother in arms here, this is gonna be fun.
Yeah, it's your product guys, right? That's always fun.
Right. And then all you sales guys are gonna go, can we just get to the parts where I need, anyways.
Yeah.
So, all right. So when I first started calling you, I come from, of course, a screen printing background where we need things to be in register. And when we say in register, we mean that there's no white peaking on our prints. But in the world of DTF, as many of you are aware, seeing a little bit of white peaking is very common. So I went through the steps of dialing everything in. When you get asked that question, it's a multi-stage answer. I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
What is it that we go about doing?
So generally, like you're saying, in the DTF world, we of course are concerned with registration as well.
Yeah.
So it's something we ideally, want it to be perfect every time. Now, but there are certain, limits to that as far as like how far the customer's expectation is on and how much time they want to put in.
Well, and you also said that there's a physical limitation within precision movement of the parts. So there's a natural kind of looseness to it. What is that?
Right. I mean, it's really the mechanical, the motion of it, like the motors moving and getting them in coordination, even though it seems like, well, you just get the X motor and the Y motor and they should, get calibrated automatically. But there's a lot of stuff in the back end that goes along with that. We're talking everything from the proper motor drivers to select for the proper resolution, all the way down to the gear ratios and the belt tension, stuff like that. So all those nuances make every single printer a slight bit unique. We're even talking like the environment, your physical environment making a big difference.
So how humid, how hot, how dry.
Exactly. To give you guys a rundown on what we do, in the development stage, we work with, what are the proper motors, what are the proper motor drivers, so that's all done in development. So after all that's completed, every single printer that goes out, after it's manufactured, we go through a pretty heavy quality control process, and that includes everything from calibration of all the gear ratios precision, measurements with calipers on, like we're talking microns, like 0.1 of a millimeter. You want to get that dialed in the Y. The encoder reading.
Pink purple looking strip.
Yeah, and this
almost invisible.
It's transparent. Yeah, you could see little lines if you kind of peek through it really closely. And so we just want to make sure that's dialed in as well. There's a lot of little nuances. And then on top of that, like you were mentioning, the table height from the printhead plate.
Right.
You want to get that within, again, like point. It's going to be like 2.5, 2.8 millimeters. Then you want to make sure to have that dialed in on every single printer. And we're talking not only the entire, because it has 4 different.
We're creating layers here.
Like even if a single layer of that stack is misaligned or like not in tolerance, then it just has to stack up, which we call like a tolerance stack. Where it just starts, one thing is off, then another thing will be off due to that. And then you're just going to have this tolerance stack and you're going to see something like it's not in register.
Yeah.
And what's going on?
So in that, I also learned that there's a natural travel that can happen from the white to the color over time, that like whenever you're starting up a new roll, you want to double check alignment of all your nozzles, which we're going to go through today to show some of that. We did a print yesterday that I noticed that my white had traveled down just a little bit by a pixel or two.
Yeah.
And you know, to me, I'm like, well, everything should be perfect.
Right.
And it's like, okay, normal change, normal travel, normal distance is a pixel or two at so half a millimeter to or so, maybe a little less of possible shift over time, especially when you're doing a new roll.
Yeah, and which we call like a fine-tuning manual adjustment on top of everything else. So there's a digital head alignment where you do these printouts. That'll get you about 98% of the way there.
Yeah.
And then if you really want to dial it in, beyond that to the point where it's perfect, then you got to do some fine-tuning. That's what I call it.
We need to go through and do the print nozzle adjustments from color to white, vertical, horizontal, and then do unidirectional, both directions, and all kinds of digging deep for making sure things are dialed. And of course, I'm the guy who likes to do dot on top of dot printing, and that's what I expect out of everything that I produce. So we dove in, we dug deep, and then we got it really close. And you were saying that you get like 98% of the way there?
And we're talking, the printouts with the alignment printouts that you have on your user interface.
Yeah.
So that will get you 98% of the way there. Now, if you want to dial it in to the point where it's 99.99, again, we're not going to get to anal to 100. Yeah. So 100, really, we could say you're 100, but I'm just kind of.
We know what 100 is. We know what 100 is. It's a goal.
Yeah, it's a goal.
It's a process-driven goal.
Right. So like they call it the March of Nines, right? So you want to get 99.999.
Yeah.
So, as long as we get to like 2 or 3 nines, I think we're pretty satisfied.
Oh yeah.
With that. Yeah. So that's where the fine tuning alignment comes in, where you have to do all those like a
little bit of a manual shift. And what I noticed is that shift ended up being like 1 or 2 little points. To the average user, the question is, why are you going to this level, this depth of detail? The reason for that is a lot of you have seen it. You've seen the amazing designs that are done on a colored garment, most likely a black garment, in which the color fades into the shirt and it's all halftone dots. Well, the smaller your print area, the more everything needs to line up really, really precisely. And if it doesn't, then you see it. And it's really, really evident when you get into those smaller details. So things have to line up. I did that Jaguar print in which we were trailing off into really fine dots. I've been pushing the lines, pun intended, of what we can do with fine line printing because that need exists. So how can we get the machine to do what I want from a screen printer's perspective, which was not the original intent of the machine, but it's creeping into our world like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just because it's a mechanical device, you are going to see some variation or not perfect registration when you expect it to. That's when you try to dial it in using
the manual adjustments.
Yeah, that we're going to talk about.
And then there's that natural. Again, there's a natural drift over time.
Right.
For that, we're talking like 50 microns. But if you've ever coated a screen, yeah, 50 microns is important. Now, so now that we have our color, all the print heads lined up, we have the color lined up to the black, we have the white lined up to the black and everything else. We're happy with where it's lining.
Right.
How do we ensure that we're getting the best out of our color development? What are your processes to ensure that color is as true as possible?
Sure, yeah. So we go through an entire process. We, color profiling, which I'm sure if you're in this kind of industry, you're aware of, where we, so
Pantone doesn't exist in our industry at all.
Right. So we do, pretty much end-to-end using our inks, which are, developed by us and formulated by us. We use those things as well as the film. So you have to be really particular in whatever film you're going to use and the inks. You have to make sure that's going to be we're going to be profiling with. Yeah.
So you're saying that the coating on the film itself,
right,
can have an impact on color development.
Absolutely.
In a nutshell, how does that work? I mean, do you see like yellow pulls on a off tint, or do the inks not stack properly?
Yeah. Right. So there are some additives that are applied to the film coating that do change tint of all the primary colors are, in this case, CMYK.
Right.
So you are going to see color differences just based on, and even if, let's say you're using a hot peel from this manufacturer, there is a difference if they're not consistent with their lots. So even if it's the exact same product code from that particular manufacturer, the inconsistency and the variation of their lots make a difference in color accuracy.
Right. Now, do you see a difference in films coming from Asian manufacturers versus films coming from European manufacturers?
Initially, yes. So China, there was a wide range, and there still is.
Yeah, there always will.
Yeah, there always will be. Yeah. So you have really low tier stuff, mid tier, all the way to now. They're really getting into, they're getting
dialing stuff
in. And with the European manufacturers, there are not too many of them, in the first place. So the few we've tested, they sort of surprisingly, and we were surprised by this, is they were a bit in the mid-range. So in Europe, they don't have as many manufacturers. So they're usually in the mid-high-ish range. So but the reason is that we don't have as many, and that was surprising to us, to choose from. There are only a few of them.
Okay.
And they were okay, but we've seen better results from, for example, our supplier.
Yeah.
Yep. They're giving us pretty consistently high quality from lot to lot.
So you're saying that film has at least as much of an impact on color development as the inks and the color profiling of the inks.
Sure.
Or it definitely impacts.
It definitely impacts.
So when we talk with customers who have gone to a supplier and gotten an order, and then they go back to them to reorder, and there's color shift, it's not necessarily that that supplier changed their printer, and like they have a couple of different models, or they changed their CMYK inks. It could be that they're changing film as well, or a new batch of film, or they got a new supplier of film, and that can, a royal blue.
Right. New batch of film. I mean, really, it's even, let's say it's the same exact product code from the exact same film supplier, and you're like, well,
depending on their quality control.
Right. Yep. So their quality control has to be, they really have to have that dialed in. Otherwise, you are going to see variation from batch to batch, and that's going to affect color accuracy. And you're like, well, I had this job I was doing 2 months ago, and I was going for a royal blue, and now it doesn't look so royal. It looks like
too magenta or too cyan.
Right. And that's just due to their consistency of batches.
Wow.
Yeah. It's wild, but it's actually very important.
Wow.
To make sure you have a film consistency. First of all, you got to make sure that it's high quality as far as in terms of absorption.
Yeah.
In terms of wash fastness.
Right.
In terms of texture and hand feel.
So the wash fastness.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew the absorption part of the conversation. I tested an inexpensive film at one point, and the moment I started printing, I saw puddling of ink, and I'm like, that's not good. Not good at all.
Right.
Color fastness from the film.
Right.
I mean, in a nutshell, how does that
So it is related to the absorption.
Okay.
So if, for example, from one lot to another or one batch to another, there's a inconsistency of the way they apply the coating on the film. It's going to absorb slightly bit differently, maybe less, maybe more.
Okay, so that absorption creates the color density, which can create color shift.
Yes.
If you're a screen printer, it's similar to having waves in your screen, but when you're coating and then printing, because one section will have a thicker ink deposit than another, that changes your color development.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. It's mechanical. It should just work.
Yeah, right. And the same goes with inks. We manufacture our own inks with our formulation, and we have to make sure that every single batch that comes into play is dialed in to a range. We have like delta E values. We have a big old formulation and make sure that, okay, is this going to be like indiscernible to the human eye?
Right.
Sure, from batch to batch. And then on top of that, after 30 washes. 50 washes.
Yeah. Color fastness over time. Right.
Yep.
There's multiple things going on there. We have the color going down, then we have the white going down, and then that's drying, evaporating a little bit before it gets the powder on there. And all of that, of course, is our layer of ink and hot melt powder that sticks to the shirt.
Yeah.
So the inks have to be color fast, and then the glue has to hold it to the shirt.
Right.
Where do you see like the biggest variables that a consumer, walks into when they start changing things? So maybe they're changing the inks to something cheaper,
right?
Changing their film because they're like, hey, I can get this for half.
Yeah.
And the powder, it's like, oh, I don't like this powder. It's too stiff, whatever it is. And we'll talk more about powder here in a little bit. Where do you what are your like biggest consumer? They call up and say, blah, blah, blah. You're like, well, what did you change?
What did you change? Yep. I mean, it starts with the most obvious one is inks. Obviously, that'll probably have the biggest impact. Just due to inconsistency of every single lot, and the color is going to change depending on the amount of pigment you have.
Right.
And, your ratios of distilled water to what, everything else that goes into the inks. And then film, surprisingly, you'll be surprised how
much that really does impact.
How much, yep. And then powder will have an effect on just overall hand feel as well as wash fastness. Wash durability.
Do you see some powders have an impact on, of course, the color fastness over time?
Yes and no. I mean, it's really more related to the durability. I would say not as much as you would think.
Not as much as a direct correlation to holding pigment,
right?
But a direct correlation to holding the print intact.
Yes, correct.
Because again, the hot melt powder is holding onto that ink layer, and that's what's holding the ink layer onto the shirt.
Right. It's actually like, I like to think of it like a polymer stack.
Yeah.
Just stack of, even, our inks are polymer based.
Yeah.
And then you just have stacks of like the PET film on the bottom, and then they have their release coating, and then you have your color layer, you have your white layer, and then a TPU powder, and you apply that onto a garment. And in this case, if it's polyester or something, then you have a stack of polymers, right? So
better living through chemistry.
Yeah. Yep. So just gotta make sure every section of that stack is is working well.
Right.
With the rest of the stack.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. We need a proper ink formulation. We need to use the proper film. We need to use the proper adhesive, the hot melt powder. I first got into that conversation when I was looking at powders for plastisol transfers. I had opportunity to talk to a couple of powder manufacturers from Europe, Bostik, Grilltex. I learned a lot about how they've been used in the industry over the years, with a big focus being on like neck labels. Years ago, Hanes introduced their tagless shirts using the transfers, and that was one of those big aha moments that I was told about of the durability of the thermal powder being used, and then the softness, how soft it felt versus the wash durability. And I'm like, this is cool stuff.
Yeah.
Why did you pick the powder that you guys did? Because you did the testing.
Right.
And what did you find when you went to powders that gave you a softer feel?
Yeah.
Because powders, the hardness of a powder is very similar to a squeegee durometer. You can get powders that are really, really soft, like a 50 or 60 durometer squeegee, all the way up to really hard powders, like an 80 or 90 durometer squeegee. And of course, that's going to affect how it feels on the garment. the harder it is, the longer it washes, and the softer it is, the faster it's going to fall off in the wash. But what?
Yeah, as a general rule of thumb, that's
As a general statement.
And we really, it's really a balancing act on. We don't want to go too rigid on the hand feel. We still want to, make sure when you're the texture of it and the hand feel is something you're happy with. It just doesn't feel like a big clunk of plastic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want to compromise, wash fastness, wash durability.
Yeah.
So, the reason why we selected and we tried maybe say closer to 20 different powders and of different grain sizes.
And the bigger the grain, basically the heavier the deposit of adhesive on the ink. There's other things that we could talk about with that, but
yeah. So the reason why we selected what we did is just due to making sure that you're getting good hand feel and it doesn't affect wash fastness, wash durability.
So there's enough glue down on the ink in order to hold it to the shirt through what we expect of 50 to 60 wash cycles.
Yeah. And even more in some cases, it should be more, but 50 should be the bare minimum. With just barely, no cracking and just wash color fastness.
So you talked about color fastness and of course cracking of the print. The softer you go with these powders, the softer the feel of the shirt is, and that stretchability can improve. But you wash that 20 times and now you start to see that crack. Which, you go, oh, well, that's just standard t-shirt printing. You didn't cure the ink quite well enough if you're seeing it crack that soon. So but again, we're talking about long-term durability. The shirt becomes like something that you wear through the years, not the months, not something that's an event where you put it on, you wear it, yay, team! And then it becomes, a rag to clean the car with in a month.
Just the material selection affects that a lot, as well as user application. So you could assume that, okay, well, I feel like I did a good job. I let it sit, and for some reason, maybe you didn't have the oven set up at the right temperature, so it didn't cure. The TPU powder onto the material or onto the prints well enough, or you didn't have powder applied evenly and thoroughly on the prints. So, and you'd be surprised on how often that happens.
Well, I've never run out of powder when I'm running a job. No, not at all.
You had talked about temperatures for melting the powder. Let's go over that and how important that dryer temperature is, because it's something that I've experienced as well. When I'm setting this up, trying to figure out why something was or wasn't working, what's this visual that I'm seeing? My first question that I had recently was, why am I getting, like these little pinhole effects? But let's, before we go into that, let's just talk about, what is the process? You have your ink and your powder on the film. Now it's going underneath the heat source. What's the process that's actually going on there?
There's a melting point to the powder. So that's what, you essentially want to have that powder melted onto, the ink stack. So, and there's a melting point to that.
It's usually 200 to 240.
Yeah, with our ovens, we usually have them set to a certain range right out of the factory, and that's generally, for the most part, give or take 5 degrees plus.
It's a great default place to start.
Yeah, exactly. So you may think, okay, well, the melting point of the powder is 220 to 240, but my oven says 140 Celsius. That's quite a bit higher. Why is that?
Like 280?
Yeah, 280. Yeah. Now with the temperature that the powder is seeing, that's going to be a little bit lower because there's difference, from the sensor.
There's always just like with the dryer that you get for screen printing, any sensor that's up near the heat source is always going to read higher, and it's just about maintaining consistency so that we know what that heat is consistently on the garment, or in this case, the film and the glue. So the temperature that gets onto the glue is going to be in that probably 240 to 260 range if the top is 280, and it's only a few inches away. So there's not a big temperature discrepancy.
And the reason why I'm explaining that is due to there's no sweet spot, like a perfect oven temperature. That's going to work with every single oven out there. So, that's going to vary. So it's like, hey, where should I put my temperature for my oven? Well, that depends on what oven you're using. In this case, for the OmniDTF, we generally have it set to 140 degrees Celsius. and that's working out well with just where the temperature probe is placed, as well as,
and then also the combination of time through the tunnel.
Yep.
The time it takes to absorb the heat. Little areas, of course, absorb heat faster. Bigger areas kind of soak it up.
Right.
It's a giant sponge.
Yeah.
So in that, are we seeing evaporation of the water and the glycols and everything else using the ink?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yep. You're seeing water and glycol, like you said, as well as even if there's some moisture in the film. The film and the powder as well. And that's one thing Colin and I were discussing, is that the powder itself is hydrophilic, and so even the film is to a certain degree. I mean, it is hydrophilic. So you want to make sure that you're in a climate-controlled environment.
Oh yeah, we were
biggest thing.
We were having trouble controlling our humidity early on.
Right.
We were trying to put processes in place because this is not the perfect space to put it. So in the summer, when we installed this, we had high humidity levels. It was over the recommended 60 max.
Right.
And even 60, I found, for the film. Your film, if it's sitting there and you're not printing a whole lot, it'll soak up that moisture. So when it was going through underneath the powder shaker, it was grabbing onto some of the powder.
Right.
So those are, absolutely. There's downsides to that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the other thing, is you also don't want to go too low in humidity. Then you're going to get what we call static electricity buildup. And that's going to...
Ink going off like fireworks.
Yeah, right. The film is going to get affected. We have an anti-static coating on the film that's applied, but there's a limit to that. You don't want to apply too much of that. That's going to have effect with it. It's going to start
our dry environment that we have right now. I mean, we're at what, 32% humidity, which is really low.
Pretty low.
But it's cold humidity. It's not a hot dry, which really has a more of an impact with the static.
For sure.
So we're fortunate in that. I haven't seen it yet. So as it goes through, it's evaporating out, the ink is evaporating, the powder is melting. So you have gases coming off of the ink going through the hot melt.
Right.
And then that hits it's gone. And now the hot melt powder is evening out.
Right.
And that's where that, kind of that orange peel look comes from. Is there a level of different visual textures, like one's better than another? Or is it kind of like you've got powder there, it's melted and you're good?
Just as a general rule of thumb, I mean, you don't want to think too much about, is it completely smooth? No, you don't really need to get to that, granular level of perfection of how it looks. Of course, aesthetically, it'll be better to have a nice, perfectly smooth finish, like a solid orange peel with
minimal bumpiness.
Right. Yeah, right.
Gentle rolling hills.
But in your case, you were showing me these little pinholes, and yes, that it could have an impact if it goes too far. Like if those pinholes go through and into the front layer of the print,
right,
and then you're gonna start to see the print displaced from the film,
right,
and then you're going to notice these artists.
So you can basically over dry the ink. Basically, there's no reason for the coating to work because there's no liquid there for it to hold on to and absorb. And now it's just two dry pieces that come off of each other, which I've seen on tons of different transfers. Not just us and playing around with settings and seeing, is this right? I've seen that on multiple brands of transfers. So that tells me that it was too hot,
right,
or in there for too long, and that's why too much evaporated out. So our solution for that was to drop our temperatures a little bit.
You could adjust it by increments of 5 degrees Celsius, quite a bit, and then just might get better results. So
don't be afraid to play with it. These are all basic, deeper dive questions past what the Omni tutorials had given us, which were great, by the way. When I was introduced to this, I went through them okay, cool, awesome. And then I got in there and using all of that knowledge, I definitely got started and got going. And then my niche needs to be really, really precise started to take over. So what are those little things that you would say out of everything, out of a basic startup, pay attention to these 1, 2, 3 things?
Right. So you would assume that, okay, well, I went through the basics and I should know this, but powder application and ensuring that powder gets applied to a wet layer of ink, and you want to make sure that your prints are not dwelling too long before powder gets applied to them, will have an effect on, again, wash durability. And
so the ink needs to be wet enough to absorb and hold on to the powder.
Right.
And if you print pause before you get powder on there, it may not hold on to enough.
Right, exactly. And it may transfer just fine. It may look great even after a wash or two.
But it's the long-term durability.
Yep. Yeah. So that's one thing I noticed. We do have a few cases regarding that. The powder stuck on there, and I was able to transfer it fine, but it's just not holding up in the wash. Do you pause your printer a lot and go on breaks? Yes, I do occasionally. And that's going to affect your, because you got to make sure. And then, so we have a testing protocol that we also practice. How long should print, after being printed, be exposed, like dwelling, before it gets powder applied to it?
Yeah.
And generally, you don't want to go too much over 10 minutes, 15 tops.
That's actually a pretty good window.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it generally takes about 4 to 5 minutes, even sometimes more, depending on your settings, like resolution, as well as
the drip error, your print speed, your linear feet per hour,
right.
All of those,
Yep. And resolution,
because the higher resolution, more ink goes down.
More ink goes down, and it scans and feeds a bit slower.
Yeah.
As well as your, what we call feed adjustment settings, which is your interlace weave overlap.
Yep.
So that's going to add time as well. So it's going to be closer to like 8 minutes.
Okay.
So now you're looking at getting close. So if you're turning everything up, you got to make sure you keep going and you don't have any breaks in between. So that's something to keep an eye on. And you feel like, okay, well, it looks great. And sometimes you just have to ensure that, you were able to get that powder onto a wet enough layer of ink.
Another segue question, because you talked about a heavier ink deposit from higher resolution.
Right.
Since we started printing, we played with higher resolution a couple of times, but we saw fantastic detail, color quality, just the smoothness of the print at your base resolution.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which I was ecstatic about. I didn't have to go to a higher resolution to get the print quality out of it that I wanted, the color smoothness.
Right.
Where do you see most customers gravitating and living in the base resolution, or where do you see the customer need from a customer conversation point of view for those higher resolutions?
Yeah, so really it's like a law of diminishing returns. We feel like 720 by 1800 is really optimal in terms of speed and quality.
Yeah.
And you are not going to see much of a difference as far as like pixel resolution and getting those fine details by going with 3600. Our 3600 is a slight bit saturated because that's what people, I think there was this expectation that, well, my colors aren't as bright or as, rich, using this resolution. So, well, it's like, that's not really what it's
I have
for.
a comment.
Right.
Check your monitor settings.
Yeah, there's that too. So that's another thing to keep in mind, right? The RGB to CMYK.
Yeah, RGB to CMYK. I mean, that's a whole different world of art conversation. So when I hear that, I immediately default to I think there is an issue with the source image.
Right. Yeah.
So
but for the most part, 720 by 1800, most of our customers, I would say 95+% of them will be just fine with it. Will be happy with it.
Yeah.
Our 720 by 2400 and 720 by 3600 resolutions for this printer, you are getting similar color accuracy, a slight bit more saturated.
Right.
And, you're going to get a higher, L value on your white. So your white's going to be a slight bit brighter as well. But again, I would say for the most part, you don't really need to go there. I mean, with screen printers, I know you guys really want bright whites, so that's where 3600 is going to come into play. It's going to help improve that white brightness just a little bit if you want to go that.
So if I don't need the color saturation, or if my design is balanced and I'm like, wait, that's actually throwing off my color balance.
Right.
Is there a way to boost that white, that L value, the lightness value,
right,
in your print in the 720 by 1800.
No, we were at the maximum allowable limit for the white
And that's just a programming.
Yeah, that's just a color profiling because we, you know, when we're doing the color profilers, you know, like the ink limit, you know, so you want to make sure that it doesn't go over that limit. Otherwise, you are going to see
you'll start to see a little bit more pastel effect of the color?
No, not pastel effect. It's just the load that the film itself could take.
So now let's get into like some of the maintenance stuff. The things that, again, going through the Omni Academy, I saw a lot of the basic maintenance. I'm like, yeah, total no-brainer. You know, grease up the bars, wipe down the encoder strip, you know, make sure you're cleaning everything except the actual print head, you know, that sort of stuff. But something that I've noticed and is a habit of a lot of users that aren't printing every day is the settling that's going to happen within an ink tank. And historically, we knew about that from the direct-to-garment stuff. I mean, it was different ink formulations, similar-ish, but you know, you always had to take your white and shake it every day as a default. Now, I've heard, and coming into this, I heard a lot of talk that I didn't need to do that kind of, you know, maintenance to my ink tanks every single day. Is that true?
No, it's not. You definitely, the single biggest maintenance item is your white ink.
Yeah,
really. It affects everything from just, you know, how your prints are going to look all the way to wash durability. So you have to make sure that white ink is properly homogenized, agitated, you know, stirred every single day, circulated every single day. That's really what's going to affect the quality of the prints as well as, you know, the wash durability.
And that was something that, you know, when we first had this installed during our 20th anniversary, none of us had time, unfortunately, to go in and use and test the machine. And when we did, that white ink had been sitting for 2 weeks. So we did testing and we're like, oh, the white's not as bright. What's going on here? Along with, we were checking registration and all this other stuff. And we're like, well, we were told that you don't need to do these. It's like, okay, no, the truth is, over time, is there, you know, buildup of sediment in these inks? I mean, is that in the color, or is it just in the white, which has a really heavy pigment?
Right, primarily on the white.
Okay.
It's because of the pigment. It's using titanium oxide as a base.
Right.
And that is going to settle really quickly. You'll be surprised at how fast that settles. I would say, you know, within a few days, you are going to see the pigment sedimentation at the bottom of the tank.
Yeah.
If you're not careful. So, you know, one thing you have to make sure is you lift the bottles and you not only stir them, but shake them.
Yeah.
You know? And additionally, you know, this is what I like to do. I really think it needs to be done is just to prevent that pigment sedimentation at the bottom of the bottle. At least twice a week, I would go in there and take a little plastic stirrer and get in there, stir that white ink. If you're scraping, like literally scraping off pigment.
If you can feel resistance.
Right. Yeah. And it may be too late. And what I would suggest you do is pour the white ink, the remaining white ink, in a bottle, different bottle. Clean out your white ink bottles, come back and pour that ink, and then just have some additional ink as well. Yeah.
And you were saying that that's probably like once every 3, maybe 4 months, you should take a hard look at what's in there. But if you're doing that maintenance regularly,
right, then you don't.
Then you'll never encounter it because you're taking care of it and doing things right.
Yeah. But it just as a general rule of thumb, every quarter you want to just make sure your white ink bottles, particularly, don't have, you know,
any sediment.
Yeah, sediment. Yeah. And if they do, just clean them out every quarter. Generally, though, if you're handling everything okay, we recommend once a year to clean out all the bottles and just, you know, just to have a...
Would it be simpler just to buy a new set?
It may be in some cases. If you're like, I don't want to deal with cleaning bottles, then yeah, sure, go ahead, buy a new set of bottles.
Cool.
And regarding your question about the rest of the colors, not so much. The CMYK, I give it a little swirl and you'll be fine.
The pigments are really loose.
Yep. The yellow, you would notice perhaps some pigment separation. It has that kind of dark green tone to it.
Yeah.
And if you notice that, that's where you give it a stir.
Normal yellow pigment has a darker tone to it.
Yeah.
The first time I saw a actual pigment list, I was like, what the heck are half of these colors? And then when I saw them applied, I'm like, This blows my mind.
Yeah, which surprises a lot of people. They think that there's something mixed in with their yellow, and they're like, "Yeah, how great my yellow?" Or
It's like, did it cyanide contamination? No, that's a natural pigment color.
Right.
It's bizarre.
So yeah, it's good to at least give them the CMYK a good swirl every few days. And the white, for sure, it's a daily maintenance.
Daily.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Stir, circulate. We have our automatic circulation, so that goes through the entire circulation cycle. But you want to do that even twice if you're having it sit for 2 days or so.
Yeah.
Run through that circulation.
There are some nuances around actually transferring a print. So one of those things that I was told, and I heard this from several different sources, different things and places in the industry, that you need to do a double press for various reasons. And what I was told was that first press is to set the print on the shirt and to remove the carrier.
Right.
And then the second press is to finish the melt and to maybe get any peripheral melt to kind of sink into the shirt a little bit, maybe apply texture. But if you don't press for that first full amount and then for that second full amount, it's not going to last in the wash. But then I married that up with, well, wait a minute. I was told from my plastisol transfer days that if you press for too long, that glue can actually melt into the shirt fibers, and then you have very little glue sticking to the ink. Where is the truth within all that, and where is some of that half true?
Right. So regarding, first off, the second press, it's not quite needed if you do a long enough first press. So if you're doing 15 seconds minimum on the initial press, and
so a 15 to second first press.
Yeah, first press, you'll be just fine in the wash. You're not going to have any issue.
Okay, so that glue is holding on to everything properly for that 50-60 wash cycle.
Yeah, and this is given, of course, with the proper temperature, pressure, all that. Yeah.
So 260 just for poly or 260 also for cotton?
So 260 just for poly, generally, it's more on the lower end.
Okay, and because there's no moisture in poly.
Yeah, right.
And what we're talking about probably is the moisture evaporation, which can cool things down on cotton.
Right, no, it's really just 300 is sort of the baseline where we would consider film to be just the optimal temperature for film to release, as well as the powder to melt.
Oh, 260 just because of the time needed to help the carrier to release.
Some polyester garments are just, they start to turn rigid if you go ahead and press it, and they stiffen up and they turn into...
You're melting the poly because it's low quality, or you can, the round thread gets a flat spot on it.
Yeah. The 260, we just have that window there just for poly for certain.
It's available as an option not because of mechanics.
Right.
No. Just the fabric.
Oh, it's the fabric. Generally, the fabric is your limiting point on how high you could go.
Okay.
Certain polys will not like a higher temperature.
Okay.
They'll start to bind up and
yeah.
So you just want to make sure. Okay, will my poly be? And if you could work with 300 on your poly, and it's not gonna stiffen up
or dye migrate
yeah. But so we generally say 280 for poly, you'll be just fine. Even at 15 seconds, it's gonna last in a wash.
Okay.
For 15 seconds, yeah.
So what if I'm on a tri-blend that could have some dye migration issues?
Yeah.
I want to press as low as possible so that I'm not gonna experience that.
Yeah.
If I'm gonna set my heat press for 260, do the tri-blend or whatever blended garment you're doing,
right?
Which is going to be 25 to 50% cotton.
Right.
What would you do different at 260 with your transfer?
Really 15 seconds is just fine.
It's a blanket statement, 15 seconds.
And the truth is a secret here, and I don't want to say it because it's going to tempt a lot of people to do this, is you'll be just fine at 300 degrees for like 7 seconds, and it'll hold up in a wash, right?
But you know that there are potential downfalls and issues. 15 seconds is a safety place.
Yeah.
7 seconds is if you want to live dangerously.
Right. 7 seconds is if you have everything down perfectly and apply the powder. But really, it's best to have that, that window just for safety's sake. Just have 15 seconds, blanket. It'll work on 260, 280, 300, 320.
Okay. So I could because I'm the guy who likes to know what I can and can't get away with. I can run everything at 260 for a minimum of 15 seconds.
Right.
And air quotes, I'm good to go.
Good to go.
But again, longevity, texture, all the rest of it, do a second press, texture, and then it's 5 seconds?
Yeah, 5 seconds. Really, the second press at that point would just be for the texture. Yeah,
okay.
Just hand feel. And, of course, coming from the screen printing world, you probably don't want to feel, you want least amount of plasticky surface finish as possible. Right?
I'm going to do a giant rectangle. I want it to feel soft.
Yeah, you don't want it to be, right. If you do that second press, it's going to help improve that finishing top surface.
Okay, sure. Sorry, I do have one last question. Powder application. How can I keep the powder from creating a little halo around my print?
Oh yeah, so again, that's related to, first off, make sure you maintain your print heads. And that's,
so it's all about the moisture.
Moisture, yes, yeah. Because the one thing that could happen is your print heads, if they're not maintained, when the print ejects out of the nozzle, it's going to start to slightly deflect.
Right.
And that's where you're going to see around the perimeter of the.
So it's not so much that the powder is just sticking to the outside. It's that there's a little bit of ink scatter,
right,
and then that can hold on to the powder, and then that creates that halo.
Exactly. So that's the first.
Maybe we should look at how to maintain print head, cleanliness in terms so that we can do that.
Sure.
All right, cool.
Absolutely.
You were talking about how the ink levels can, between the 720, 1800, and the higher resolutions have more ink going down, so you get a better white level. Is there a way to bring that lightness, that extra white, into the 720, 1800? So that I can say, hey, I want just a little more. I mean, my experience has always been it's really good, right. But I'm a screen printer and I'm comparing it to Plastisol. Can we boost that a little bit higher?
Yeah, we do have a little bit of a window we kept open just to have a tolerance. So you could increase that white, the L value, just a slight bit up.
10%.
It's going to be about 8% or so. Yeah,
he's measured it.
Yeah, yes. It's actually under your print setup, and you have your white outer base level set to 92.8.
Oh, okay.
Turn that up to 100, and you're going to go full.
Is there a downside to that?
Yeah, depending on a film variation and inconsistency, again,
right.
We try to make sure
you have fuzz factor built in for
exactly
everyone's going to try and find a cheaper product.
Right.
That includes film.
Yeah.
So built in that fudge factor so that they don't have a negative issue.
That fudge factor is even for our film supplier.
And just make sure natural variance.
If there's any kind of variance, and there is like you said, a natural variance, you cannot get batch after batch to be exactly the same. So we have that little factor built in. 92, you can just turn that up to 100 and you get the brighter whites.
Rob, dude, I have learned so much with your visit. This is immensely appreciated. My geek level satisfaction is overflowing. Again, thank you so much for coming out, you and Victor.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been a pleasure, Colin. You've really, geeked out with me, and you've kind of shown me and asked me a bunch of different things that, have pushed us to the limit of understanding the printer better.
Yeah.
And appealing to the screen printing industry.
Yeah.
And your customers, and that feedback is really valuable. Super.
Thank you everybody who stuck through us on this long video. Hopefully everything that you've learned today is going to do nothing but help you moving forward. If you guys have any questions for myself or for Rob, Omni in general, throw a question down there in the comments. If you like this really long video, like and subscribe. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Looking forward to talking to you more this year.
Bye, everyone.